we have a guest speaker tonight we've been talking about, and we're so happy to have him. He has founded a ministry after being a pastor for a number of years. He planted a church, and then a few years ago he felt a special call to Christian education in the country. I spent the last 30 or 40 minutes talking to him before the service. He feels so strongly that this is really the hope of America, that we train people in a biblical worldview, that we get them to thinking Christianly, if you will. And so his ministry now is talking to people about a biblical worldview. His organization is called Renew a Nation. Renew a Nation. Lights. But we welcome you here tonight. Glad to have you with us. And Jeff Keaton, we're glad to have you tonight. Come on up, brother, and speak to these people here. They're anticipating your coming. God bless.
Good evening. It is great to be with you, and thank you, Pastor Monroe and Jim Barry, for inviting me to come. And 50 years, what an honor to be here for this celebration. I'm only 54 years old, so I was 4 years old when you launched this school. And my dad launched a school 46 years ago. He had 9 children, and we were all in public school, those of us who were of age. And my dad just woke up one day and said, you know what? God, I wanted to be taught every single day. And that was the first experience I ever had with a Christian school. And God used Christian education to really impact my life, give me a biblical worldview. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing tonight. So I want to thank you, Pastor, for planting this school night. I have a lot I want to share with you tonight, but I want to move as quickly as I possibly can. So we're going to jump right into it, all right? In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 4 and 5, we read, "For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations or arguments and every high thing or lofty opinion that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ." I cannot think of any greater way to define the mission of Christian education than to say it is our mission to help our students learn to destroy every argument and lofty opinion that is raised against the knowledge of God. That is the mission of Christian education, and to teach them to bring every single thought under the lordship of Jesus Christ. Did you know that Jesus is not just Lord of the church, but he is Lord of government and business and medicine and law, Lord over everything. And our mission in Christian education is to help children and students understand how to bring every part of this world under the lordship of Jesus Christ. I have discovered that when we give our students a biblical worldview, they are enabled to destroy the arguments and lofty opinions that are raised against the knowledge of God. One man said, he can stand up against the devil and defend himself when men seek to lead him astray. The phrase that I like the most is that we should equip our young men and women so that they can go into this world and bring the devil into disgrace. Did you know that the devil is disgraceful? Did you know that all that he is trying to sell to the hearts and minds of our children, it's disgraceful, and we better train young people to bring this. Here came into our Christian school in the 4th grade. His name is TJ. We had him for 9 years, and we baptized this young man in biblical worldview. I hired a biblical worldview lead instructor, and when I hired him, he literally was in the genius range. His IQ was off the charts, and he looked at me and said, "Pastor, what is my mission in this Christian school?" I said, "David, your mission is to train our young people so well that when they go to the University of Virginia or Virginia Tech and they get into that world religions class and that professor starts mocking I want them to be able to defend themselves in that setting." And that was the effort that we gave. TJ was one of those students that went through those courses where we worked hard to prepare him. He was with us for 9 years. He was not one of those boys that I ever caught off in a corner studying a biblical worldview book for the fun of it, to be perfectly honest with you. Never caught him doing that. He liked baseball, basketball, and pretty girls. That was TJ. He was from a good Christian home, but if you'd have come to me when he was a junior or senior and said, "Pick out the one kid in those classes who can best defend their faith in a secularized university," I would not have picked TJ. And yet his dad came and told me this story after he went off to a non-Christian college, and he landed in a class with a godless professor. For the first time in 9 years, he found a professor who hated Christianity, loved abortion. He was literally for everything TJ was against and against. Won debate after debate after debate. So much so that he said the professor came over to me one day and said, "Son, all I can say for you is you ought to be a lawyer because you're really good at this debate thing." I'll tell you why I think TJ was good at the debate thing, because we had taught him critical thinking. We had taught him absolute truth. We had taught him logic. He understood how to make his case when he needed to and when he wanted to. He hadn't been taught groupthink like so many of those other precious children had been taught. Things were going quite swell until the day the teacher walked in and said, "Today we're going to debate abortion." It kind of freaked TJ out because this teacher had been so pro-abortion. He talked about the benefits of abortion, how he loved abortion. And TJ literally, his dad told me the story first, then I went and sat down with TJ and said, "Tell me this story. I want to hear it from the horse's mouth." He said, "Honestly, I was scared." He said the teacher looked at the class, and there were 25 kids there, and he said, "If you're for abortion, come over to this side." And TJ said, "I watched in horror as 23 kids came over here and said they were for abortion." He said, "I was the only one that stood up and said I'm against abortion." He said, and some kid who didn't know what he was for stood up and said, "I don't know what I'm for, but I'm going with TJ because he wins all these debates." Since there were so many young men and women there who were for abortion, to the glee of the professor, he told the 23 students, he said, "You go first, make your case." TJ literally said to me, he said, I was sitting there going, "Why didn't I listen in those worldview classes a lot more? Why didn't I pay more attention?" He said, "I wasn't sure that I was ready." He said, "But they started making their points and making their case for abortion, and the more they talked," he said he didn't call them stupid, but he literally said, "I thought, man, their arguments are stupid. I don't think this is going to be as hard as I thought." And they finished their arguments, and then it was TJ's turn. And he didn't know where it came from, but he said, out of my heart, I began to make one point after another, after another. Let me just tell you something. If you baptize kids in the truth when they need it, the Holy Spirit will bring it back to their heart and mind. And TJ said, I didn't know where it was all coming from, but I was making point after point after point after point. And he said, somehow I got a boldness that came over me. And when I was all done, I looked at that professor and I looked at those 23 students and said, in reality, every time you have an abortion, you are murdering a little baby. As that professor always did, he looked at the class and said, if you have changed your mind, switch sides. And TJ was blown away when all 23 young men and women came over to his side. For the first time, yes. For the first time in their life, someone made a reasonable argument against abortion. They'd obviously never heard one. They made a reasonable argument against abortion, and it changed 24 other students' minds. When we give our kids a biblical worldview, they have the ability to go out and make a huge impact on this world. I think all of us can agree tonight that there is a worldview battle raging for the hearts and minds of our children in every part of our culture, and especially in the arena of education. I like to highlight the 4 major influences on children, the development of a child's worldview. There are others, but let me just highlight 4 of the major influences. First of all, the home and the family is the greatest influence for good or bad. Let me just say this to you parents. Your home is the greatest influence for good or bad. This could be the best school in But I was a senior pastor for 18 and a half years, and I can promise you, most Christian families are not having that great influence on their child. They're having an influence, a powerful influence, but it's not usually for the biblical worldview development of the child. It should be, and I'll pass a resource off to you here at the end of the night to help you do that. The church should be a dominant influence on the life of a child. But if a child attends church once a week from 6 to 18 years old, they'll attend church for about 750 to 1,000 hours during that kindergarten to 12th grade time period. They go a couple times a week, you can double that. Obviously, they're going to go to some youth camps. So the church in America, the average child's only attending church 2.5 times per month in the evangelical church in America. I'm confident that you're doing much better than that here. But let's just say you go twice a week. Your kid's going to spend about 2,000 hours at church from kindergarten to 12th grade. Now we start seeing the dominant influences. I read a study that said between 6 and 18-year-old, the average child in the United States of America will spend 15 to 20,000 hours watching television, surfing the internet, playing video games, listening to music, and watching movies. 15 to 20,000 hours with media and culture. I have had parents call me with horror stories because they literally unleashed their children on a bedroom with unchecked internet, unchecked television, and gave them a smartphone with nobody watching what was going on. I've had parents call me with horror stories. This is a major influence on the development of a child's worldview. It's dominant in our culture today. So most of the time when I share this, people, they all get this. They kind of understand this makes sense. But this is the one that surprises some people. The average child from kindergarten to 12th grade will spend 16,000 hours at school. 16,000 hours at school. And there are some people who still don't think it matters at all where a child spends those 16,000 hours. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. You put a child anywhere for 16,000 hours and it will shape their worldview and their thinking. A worldview battle is raging for the hearts and minds of our children. A major part of our mission at Renew a Nation is to help parents and pastors understand the powerful role education is playing in influencing children for good or evil. Even though I grew up attending Christian schools for most of my K through 12 years, I never saw Christian education as a critical part of my life's mission until 2 things happened. First of all, my daughters were born, Juliana and Heidi. They were born, and you remember when you had your first child, and all of a sudden they got up to 2, 3, 4 years old, and you started going, wait a minute, how are we going to educate this child? And I was pastoring an inner city church in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and I mean, it was wild and crazy and rough down there, and I was like, where am I going to send this kid to school? Then our little Heidi came along, and I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt I was now responsible for the physical and spiritual well-being of these two precious little girls. I remember holding Juliana when she was first born, and then I'm thinking, this little girl's never gonna die. Oh, her body will die someday, but she's gonna be alive somewhere forever, and the responsibility that came on my young father's heart was almost overwhelming. From the earliest days, I've had one primary desire, and I shared it with them over and over again. I told my little girls that our highest hope for them was that they would know, love, and serve the Lord Jesus with a passion. And because that was our passion, I knew I had to educate them in a way so that they would know, love, and serve Jesus. I made my mind up early on. No one was going to have access to my daughter's heart and mind who did not share my biblical values, who didn't have the same goals for my kids that God had given me for them. I'm so glad we made this commitment and kept this commitment. And today, by the grace of God, our precious girls are in love with Jesus. There they are, Julianne on her first day of school at Hollywood Christian School in Hollywood, Florida. Heidi on her kindergarten graduation day. There they are on their high school graduation pictures. I have no doubt that what they learned from kindergarten to 12th grade played a major role in who they are tonight. I challenge you not to send your daughters off to college because they will bring ugly people like this home with them. And you will never get rid of them. Once they get their foot in the door, it's over. And then this is what they do to you. They take them away from you. It's a terrible thing. But then it starts getting fun. You know what I'm saying? It starts getting fun. All right, enough about my girls. The worldview battle's raging for the hearts and minds of my children. The second experience that showed me the worldview battle that was raging for the hearts and minds of our children was my first pastorate, as I mentioned. My first church in Hollywood, Florida. It was one of those churches that was so dead that they send young pastors to those kind of churches right out of college because they know you can't possibly hurt it. It's already so far gone. That's what you get in your first assignment. We were blessed by the power of Almighty God to see many, many, many people come to Christ. Almost all of the folks who were getting saved were drug addicts and alcoholics. It was a phenomenal thing that God did. Within a few short years, we ended up with almost 150 children and teenagers, and they were getting saved. They were almost all from lower income homes, and so not a one of them was involved in Christian. I take that back. One of those children was in Christian education. All the rest were not. This is when I really began to understand the worldview battle that was raging in our non-Christian secularized schools. We were heavily involved in the Christian clubs. My student ministries, a few years in, I hired a student ministries pastor, and he came to me and he said, where do you want me to spend my time? I said, wherever our children are. He said, they're all in the public schools. I said, go live in the public schools every single day. And we ended up leading 32 Christian clubs. We had a Christian club in every middle and senior high school in Broward County, Florida that we were responsible for. We lived in those schools. Because of that, I went and started speaking in those schools and walking through the halls of those schools, and it began to dawn on me, I don't have these young people enough each week to make a dent. These precious young people were getting saved, and the teenagers were coming to my pastor's office and saying to me, Pastor Jeff, listen, you don't understand. These were kids whose parents had just gotten saved, and now the kids were getting saved. And they said, I don't think you understand. Everything you're teaching us here at school, at church, they're teaching us the exact opposite at school. Do you know that, Pastor Jeff? I said, I'm figuring it out. I started dreaming of the possibility of having these new Christian kids in a Christian school all week, and it was pure discipleship for me. It had nothing, I didn't have any interest in starting a Christian school, but I did have an interest so their parents were 35, 40, 45, 50 years old. They'd spend their lives, addicted to alcohol and drugs, and they had just messed their lives up so desperately. And I began to think, if I'm going to save that next generation on drugs and all the other lies that this culture has fed their parents, I can't just have them an hour or two each week. I've got to get to their hearts, and I've got to get to their minds. And that's how this idea began to grow on me. It was If I'm going to disciple these young men and women, I've got to have them much more time. Know it until I went there. Was the one in Virginia was an anti-Christian school church. One of the board members asked me why I would waste my money on a Christian school. When I asked him, where should I put my second grader? What's the best Christian school in the Roanoke Valley? And one of my board members looked at me. He was also a county board of supervisors member. And he looked at me and said, why would you waste your money on a Christian school? He said, all of our public schools here are pretty much Christian schools, Jeff. Just go check them out. I did, and decided that I would never let anyone who didn't share my values influence my daughters. Miraculously, by 2002, we launched a Christian school and watched it grow to almost 400 students in the first 7 years. And I saw up close and personal the power of Christian education as one student. We had all kinds of new families getting saved in our church in Virginia. And these new families would come in Christian school, and we discipled their children all week long. And today there are hundreds of them who are in love with Jesus, and they're out there in business and law enforcement and medicine and government and ministry, and they're walking with Jesus. This is why I got into Christian education, to raise up the next generation of Christian thinkers and leaders. Because of the call now God has placed on my life, I find myself speaking all over America and Canada, evangelizing people to join the cause of Christian, or more specifically, biblical worldview development and education. I am constantly amazed to find wonderful Christians, especially church leaders, who still believe the myth that education is a worldview neutral enterprise. Education is not worldview neutral ever. Did you know mathematics is not worldview neutral? History is obviously not worldview neutral. There are no worldview neutral schools. Every school, teacher, and textbook is teaching either a biblical view of life or something else. Since every school is teaching kids what to believe, they are all teaching doctrine. All schools are teaching religious doctrine. It's beliefs, a set of beliefs. Every single school you go to in this country, I can show you their core set of beliefs. I don't care what kind of school it is. Every school is teaching doctrine. Since every school tells kids the big story or meta-narrative about life, they are sharing what they believe about God's place in this world. And when He is never mentioned in a meaningful way in 13 years of schooling, kids begin to assume He's irrelevant. And the greatest curse of secularized education, be it private or public, the greatest curse in the church is not the ones that we lose. They become atheists, and I hear stories about that all the time. Parents and grandparents come up to me weeping all the time saying, my child's an atheist. They've rejected the faith. That's a tragedy. But I'll tell you a greater tragedy. Our churches are filled with young men and women who live with a sacred secular divide because God was never a part. And the reason we live in the most prosperous and productive nation in the history of mankind is because our founding fathers, and they had plenty of faults, I'm not denying that, but our founding fathers had core Judeo-Christian beliefs about government and business and law, and they implemented that, and it gave us this nation that we live in today, this nation that has been the most free and had the most liberty ever. Every school teaches children about our origins, our history, our purpose for being here, what the rules are, and who makes them, where we go when we die, and who the heroes are. You give me a bunch of kids and let me teach them who the heroes are, and they'll follow the heroes. School, like Florence Christian School, they're lifting up the right people. They're lifting up the right people. Excuse me. Every educational system is a religious system of some kind. Let me show you a few of the differences between the Christian religion you're teaching here at your school and the secularized religion being taught in non-Christian schools across America. I want to do this by highlighting how secularized education answers some of life's greatest questions, and I've just chosen a few of them out of the most basic questions that all worldviews have to answer, all educational systems have to answer. I've chosen them out of Genesis chapter 1 through 3. Let me just say this clear as I can. You want to see the ultimate difference of educational systems, find out how they answer life's greatest questions, period. So I must hurry here because I've got a few of them, but who has ultimate authority in this world? We're in a disaster because our young people don't know who's in charge. Obviously, in the first 4 words of the Bible, in the beginning, God establishes, and then throughout the rest of Scripture, and at the end of the day, when it's that, the strongest person wins. Where did we come from? God created and designed everything out of nothing. The secularized worldview is teaching children that out of nothing, chemicals came together and we evolved over billions of years to where we are today. The secular worldview, we answer the question, who are we as humans? And this is one of the most important questions in a child's life. We are created in God's likeness and image, superior to all other species and more valuable than any other species, intellectually, morally, and socially, far above all other species. That is what it means to be human. That's why we're different. The secularized worldview teaches that we're simply the most highly evolved animals with no special rights or privileges, polluting and robbing the planet and other species of their rightful place. His lordship and for his, the secularized worldview teaches discover your identity and do whatever it takes to make yourself happy. I was on the airplane with a German girl. She was 18 years old. It was her first time in the United States of America. We were flying somewhere into Louisiana. She was going to be on a track scholarship at a university down there. She was very nervous about being in the United States. She spoke perfect English. I actually told her on that trip that my grandfather was killed by the Nazis. Should have seen the look on her face. I said, I told you that because I wanted you to know that we love you. And I don't hold you accountable for that at all. And I'm so glad you're in the United States. But then I said, can I ask you a philosophical question? She said, I don't think I'm very good at philosophy. I said, you'll know the answer to this one. I said, where did you attend school in Germany? She said, I went to 14 years to German public schools. I said, what did they teach you was the purpose of life? She thought for just a moment. She said, they taught me that the purpose of life was to do whatever I want to do. I said, would I be accurate if I said they taught you that the purpose of life was to do whatever you want to do in order to make yourself happy? She said, that is exactly what they taught me. And did you know that secularized education in the United States of America pumped that into our children's heads? We pumped that into our young people's minds, and guess what? They're doing exactly what they want to do, whatever it is, and we live in chaos because of it. How do we know our gender? Male and female, he created them in every way. 2 genders make perfect sense in the real world. This is what you will discover about the biblical worldview. It always works out best in the real world because it's God's good and beautiful design. And when we violate God's good and beautiful design, disaster strikes. Right now, they're teaching children a secularized worldview that your gender is determined by how you feel about yourself at any given moment. It's utter chaos. Wednesday night, I was at a place. Grandpa came up to me. He said, my granddaughter transitioned to be a boy. He said her name is, he gave me her girl name. He said her boy name is this. She just had her breast removed and all this kind of stuff. And he was horrified. There are a whole group of those folks who are detransitioning. They went through the sex change, and now in their 20s and 30s, they're coming back. They're on Twitter if you want to find them. And they're saying, for God's sake, why didn't somebody stop the adults, stop me from doing this? It's horrible. That might sound strong to you. If it does, I'm telling you something. It's time somebody stands up and said, the emperor has no clothes. This is insanity. This is child abuse that's happening in the United States of America. How do we define the family? God perfectly designed men and women to come together in marriage, and the arrangement works best in sustaining healthy children, families, and societies. All statistics show that. Today, the secularized worldview, you know what they're saying about families. It's anything you want it to be. What is wrong with this world? Man chose to rebel against our holy God and brought the curse of sin into the world. All are born with sin in their nature and are bent to do evil. If you're raising little children, you know they're born with sin in their nature, don't you? Secularized worldview is teaching that in spite of the fact that our lives are predetermined by genetics, etc., humans are basically good, but are corrupted by the environment that surrounds them. They also say the bad things people do in this world are inevitable because we are evolutionary creatures that cannot ultimately control our chemicals, is what they're saying. That's what they actually believe. How do we fix this broken world? Christ has come to redeem humans in our broken world, and when we find broken things are redeemed and restored. God has called us to be restored as individuals, but also then to become restorers of the brokenness of this world. Secularized worldview believes that we're continuing to evolve and we'll get better and better through technology, etc. How do we define morality? Out of God's holy nature, He has given us a moral code that helps humans to thrive and the world to be a beautiful place. When we violate His code, bad things happen. Secularized worldview teaches there is no absolute moral code. Man defines morality as he chooses and as it is useful for the survival of the species. All educational systems answer these great questions of life. Secularized education offers the wrong answers to all the major questions of life. Thus, students graduate with little understanding of who they are and what their purpose in life is. Listen to me. There's a great awakening happening in the United States of America tonight. God divinely, through COVID, has awakened the parents of America. This school here was birthed in the first Christian school, Great Awakening. Then there was the homeschool Great Awakening over the last 20 years. Today, homeschooling has doubled to over 5 million kids. Christian schools are bursting at the seams. We're getting 15 calls a month right now at Renew Nation to help people launch Christian schools in communities all across America. You want to know why? Parents it's suddenly dawned on them that all forms of secularized education are not teaching their children the truth. Thank God He took something very terrible, COVID, and has turned it into something amazing. Never be ashamed for 1 second that you are teaching the Christian religion in your school. What an honor to teach kids the truth. If we do not teach kids the truth, someone else will teach them a lie. A lie. Education is really a battle of ideas, and since I speak to so many folks in churches across America who don't understand the education battle, I like to ask them the following questions. How much falsehood is too much for your child? How much falsehood is too much for your child? And so I've been asking them, would you allow your child to attend a school that taught the following statements as true? 2 + 2 is 7. Cheetahs. The Americans were defeated by the Nazis. George Washington was the King of England. And the law of gravity does not exist. I have literally, for several years now, been asking parents all across America, would you allow your child, if your local school, whatever it is, Christian, whatever it is, if they were teaching those things as fact, how many of you parents would go? That's pure insanity. By the way, they're actually teaching something more insane than that right now. But I haven't found any parents who said they would let their child. They've all told me that's too much falsehood. But then I like to ask them, what if they taught these falsehoods? God is irrelevant, even non-existent. The Bible cannot be trusted. God did not create the world. Sex outside of marriage is expected. And same-sex marriage is good and normal. And I like to say 2 + 2 is 7 is too much falsehood, but that's not enough. That's something to think about, isn't it? Is secularized education having an impact on what kids believe? Let me just show you a few slides, kind of mixing some millennials and Gen Zers. The millennials were born, and people use different numbers, but you can take the group from 1980 to 2000. There's 78 million Americans born in those 20 years. They're currently 22 to 42 years old. They're on target to be the most educated generation in American history. They're also on target to be the least religious generation in American history, and there's a direct correlation. 80% of the millennials declare they are not born again. 76% do not attend church. 94% do not affirm one or more of the cardinal doctrines, Christian doctrines. 60+% favor same-sex marriage. And I asked George Barna to his face, we speak together a few times each year, and I said, George, not long ago, the great Christian sociologist of the last 40 years, I said, George, what's your latest numbers on millennials having a biblical worldview. And he looked at me and said, do you want to get depressed? I said, no, but tell me. He said, 4%. So out of 78 million, 3 million or so have developed a biblical worldview. What I've been saying to people, maybe I stuck another slide in here. Yeah, here. So we throw in the Gen Zers. We're up to 139 million Americans. They're 10 to 42 years old right now. In 2000, 45% of Americans were considered practicing Christians. In 2020, we dropped to 25% practicing Christians. Since 2000, atheist agnostics and those who can call themselves knowns, they're not associated with anything, have grown from 11 to 21%. And this just came out in the last few weeks. 39% of the 18 to 24-year-olds in America right now identify as LGBTQ+. Why? Why? Because they have been taught that over and over and over again in our schools. Any hope? Absolutely there is hope, because when you give just one child a biblical worldview, they can change the world. The vast majority of millennials and Gen Zers who were given a biblical worldview, they believe the Bible, they're born again, and they're living out the implications of their biblical worldview in all these areas of our society. I told you about TJ from a Christian home. Now let me tell you about Tatiana from a non-Christian home. I was consulting with an inner city ministry in Roanoke, Virginia, wonderful ministry, and I was coaching their board along as they had about 150 inner city children coming every week from the projects. As I was talking to the board that night, I felt like the Spirit of the Lord and said, give them 5 full scholarships to your school. And I knew what I was doing, but I just felt the urging of the Holy Spirit. And I looked at that board and I said, listen to me. I feel like the Lord wants us to give you 5 full scholarships. I said, I'm going to pay for everything. I said, here's what I'm asking, though. I would like them younger, and they can't have a felony. That was my criteria. Now, my head of school hated my guts when I called her with that message. She was like, what are you doing? I said, look, screen them, but be liberal, because be generous, because they're not going to have the homes that a lot of our students have. I really didn't pay any attention to it until the day I decided to coach middle school girls basketball. My oldest daughter was an all-state basketball player. My youngest daughter was a cheerleader, a good one, but she wanted to play basketball, so I decided if I coached, she'd have a better chance of making the team. Let's just put it that way. So 20-some little girls bounce into the gym trying out for middle school basketball that day, and 22 or 3 of them looked like my daughter. She was having a hard time running and chewing bubble gum at the same time. And then this little girl showed up. She was running circles around every other kid in the gym. You know, middle school girls basketball, I don't know if you know anything about it, but all you need is one good player to win it all. That's all you need in middle school girls, you know. I thought we were going to go like 0-20. I saw this little girl come in. I said, we going 20-0. I already had 3 plays in mind. Play number 1, give Tatiana the ball. Play number 2, give her the ball and get farther out of the way. And play number 3, y'all just sit on the bench. Let's just watch Tatiana. You know what I'm saying? I told all those kids that day, in order to be on our team, you got to do your schoolwork, respect your teachers, respect your classmates. You got to, go with the program. I said, if you have a problem with anything I just said, hang around after everybody leaves. And the only little girl hanging around was that little girl. And I'll never forget, it was a moment. She looked me straight up in the eyes. And she said, Pastor Jeff, you said if I had any trouble in school, I'd probably tell you. She said, I've just been here a few weeks. And she said, I got a little problem in one class. I said, all right, who's your teacher? And I called back to the school. And I said, hey, I met this little, first of all, I said, who? I said to somebody, who is this girl? Where'd she come from? They said, that's one of your scholarships from Acts 2. You know, we didn't give athletic scholarships, but I learned if you obey Jesus, sometime he'll give you an athletic scholarship, you know? So I was desperately wanting this kid to be on my team. And so I called back to the school. I found this teacher. I don't remember who she was. And I just said, hey, I got this little girl, Tatiana. And she said she got a little problem in your class. And I just need to double check it before I put her on the team. And she goes, Pastor, She doesn't have a little problem in my class. She's got a massive problem in my class, and she's got a massive problem in every class. I went, oh, dear Lord, there goes my basketball season. For whatever reason, it truly wasn't basketball. The Lord said to me, don't you dare let her go. She was a pistol. I had a precious little boy from my church. He was from a Christian family, and they didn't know how to discipline him, and so he was a little punk in the school, to be straight up with you. He's one of those little church kids that needed some discipline. One day, this is the God's honest truth, Tatiana straight up disciplined that boy. So much so that he ran. He was 7th grade. He ran and jumped in the teacher's arm, put his arm around a female teacher's neck, a 7th grade boy, ladies, and said, please save me from her. I just walked away and said, the Lord works in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. It took us 2 years to calm her down and catch her up, but she's brilliant. She told me later, she said, Pastor, I was years behind. The public school system had given up on her in the 6th grade. They had told her next year, you'll likely go down to no. She told me this in her own words. She said, Pastor, they told me I was so bad. The last week of 6th grade, they brought me in the office and said, you're so bad that next year we'll probably send you off to Noel C. Taylor. That's where they send all the kids they give up on. She was that close. She told me that one day when she was sitting in the back seat. We were driving down the road. She goes, Pastor Jeff, they were going to send me to Noel C. Taylor, and then I got a scholarship to PCA. I thought, honey, if you only knew what them administrators wanted to do. In her 9th grade year, in her 10th grade year, she led Parkway Christian Academy to the state championship. That little 5'6" point guard, she scored 58 points in the Final Four. That was on the varsity team now. She ended up going over to Liberty Christian, a beautiful Christian family. Took her in for her last 2 years of high school. It was a godsend. They took her in. She made it on the Liberty University women's basketball team. She was the captain of the Liberty University for years. As a freshman, she was the captain. She was in charge of all the other inner city children and young people that were on that team. She graduated in 4 years with a bachelor and a master's. She now has her 2nd master's degree, and she is now working in the worst inner city schools you can find in Memphis, Tennessee, because she said to me, Pastor Jeff, my calling in life is to go back to the inner city and the power of a biblical worldview. She is amazing these days. Here she is. She graduated. There she is on Liberty and graduated with highest honors. What an amazing thing. This is just a few months ago. Michelle and I drove through Memphis, and we went to a barbecue place with her, and I just sat back and say, oh, Jesus. Just a few years ago, this was a little 7th grade girl that was as lost could be. She told me one day, she said, Pastor Jeff, no one's ever succeeded in my family. Everybody got pregnant before marriage. Everybody did drugs. Everybody almost went to prison. She said, I had no reason to believe whatsoever that I could ever succeed, but we introduced her to Jesus and a biblical worldview, and that girl is changing the world. All over this, amen. All over this country, and Tatiana's, TJ from a Christian home and Tatiana from a non-Christian home. Guess what? They both needed Jesus exactly the same. And they both needed to develop a biblical worldview. And TJ has actually been in Thailand, and he's back home now, but he was in Thailand. You won't believe this. A Buddhist guy, or maybe it was Hindu, whatever it is over in Thailand, hired him to help him start a school. And TJ said, well, if I teach in this school, I'm teaching the Bible. The guy said, I don't care what you teach anything. And a guy was paying him to teach little Thai children a biblical worldview. Only God can do something like that. All over this country, TJs and Tatianas are just waiting on us. They're waiting on us. We need to lead them to Jesus. We need to give them a well-developed biblical worldview. And we need to unleash them on this broken world. That is our hope, ladies and gentlemen. Some people say to me, there are a lot of long-faced Christians in this world. Did you know that? I don't like them. I'm going to tell you straight up. Don't come up to me with a bunch of long... People come up and say, do you really believe you're going to reach... Our vision is to transform culture by giving millions of children a biblical worldview. That's our vision. Our mission is to inspire and equip the family, church, and school to give children a biblical worldview. And people come up to me, literally, long-faced, you really think you're going to reach millions? And what I want to say to them is, I guarantee I'm going to reach more than you are. I promise. You know why I'm hopeful? Because I walk through the halls of Christian schools all over this nation every single week almost. I'm in some school in America, and I walk through the halls, and I see passionate teachers and administrators pouring into these young people. And I see these young people growing up and graduating and taking their Judeo-Christian values into a darkened world. Did you know our kids are going to do better in business because they believe in absolute truth? Our kids are going to do better in medicine because they understand the purpose behind medicine. They're going to do better in everything. They're going to be amazing as we unleash them on this world. Now, your moms and dads, I'm not here to sell anything. This is your 50th celebration, but I brought one brand new book that we just released, and I've got to show it to you. It is available tonight, and I'm going to close after this. Dr. Josh Mulvihill, who leads our church and family division, he and I were speaking in Baxter, Minnesota. It was actually negative 27. You think you got an excuse to skip church? It was negative 27 on that day. And it snowed 5 inches, and 300 people came out to our conference. I did get up and say, you Minnesotans are crazy. That's all I can say, you're crazy. I burned my neck all up. I didn't even take the right clothes. I didn't know what to do in negative 27. I've never been in that kind of weather. I'm never going back in January, but anyhow. Please book me in North Carolina in January, anytime. But Josh was up speaking, and he came down to the close of his speech, and he told this story that captivated me. I was like, well, I haven't ever heard this story. He said, when I was a 17-year-old boy, my mom and dad took me out to breakfast. And they said, Josh, when you were just a little boy, we sat down the things we wanted you to know before you left home. And they slid this old piece of paper, it was written on front and back, across the table. Here's the list we've been working on your whole life. How did we do? We've only got you for 9 more months. We want to know if there's something we should work on. And Josh said when they slid that old piece of paper across the table, he literally said, my whole life flashed before my eyes. He says all these check marks and dates and scribbles. And it was like, oh, that's why my dad took me on that trip. And that's why they invested so much in inductive Bible study. And that's why they did this and that. But then there were things in there like teaching him how to do small engine repair. He actually said of all the things on that list, he looked at him and said, give up on small engine repair. It's never going to work. He said, that's the only one. Well, Josh told that story, and I was literally sitting there going, why haven't I heard this before? Where is the list? I want to see the list. After our book table that day, young families lined up, and all they wanted was, Josh, do you have a copy of those things your parents taught you? I looked across the table, and he said, Jeff, I don't have it. His mother died not too long after that, and he didn't get his hands on it, but it was written on his heart. I looked at him that day. This was 3 or 4 years ago, and I said, that is your next book. We just produced it in the last few months. We've sold thousands of them. 50 things every child needs to know before leaving home. It's an amazing resource for you moms and dads because, again, you've got to do your part at home if the church here and the school here can have maximum impact. And with this, and I promise you I'm done. This is my 3-year-old grandson, Marshall. This is our first grandchild. We now have a second one, and we now have a third one on the way. This is Marshall. He lives at we have a 2,000-acre camp/ranch down in Tennessee, our ministry does. He lives down there. His daddy's now full-time on the farm down there. Almost 700 head of Angus cattle. That boy's a lot of fun. We ride 4-wheelers together. Last time I was down there, we rode a big tractor together. It was fun. But you know what dawned on me since Marshall has been born? I got to thinking one day, and I realized that it's very likely that my 3-year-old grandson's children will still be alive 100 years from right now. Think about it. So the little 6-year-olds, I don't know if we had 6-year-olds, the 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old kids up here, it's possible that their children will still be alive 100 years from right now. You know how to preserve the church of Jesus Christ? You know how to make sure that 50 years from now this place is packed to the walls? It's take these little kids well with these today, they'll do well with their children. And it goes on and on and on and on. So I absolutely commend you, Pastor, again. I'm honored to be in your presence. You're a pioneer in this field. You did this when it wasn't popular, when no one else was doing it. I commend all of you who are teachers and administrators. I commend all of you who are parents here tonight, who are making the investment. I commend all of you who are grandparents. Let me tell you, there's a revival across America of grandparents paying the tuition for their grandkids. It's happening all across America. You know what grandparents are saying to us? Rather than leave my grandchild a big chunk of change when I die, I'm going to take that chunk of change and I'm going to put it, and that is the inheritance I will leave them. Lord Jesus, what a beautiful group of people here tonight. Thank you for what you have done in this school over the last 50 years. I thank you as Pastor and I talked just a few minutes ago before the service, that he talked about this rejuvenation somewhat, this revival, renewal that's come into the life of the school in the last few years. Oh God, there are Tatianas and TJs all over this county, all over this city, all over this area. They need to know about you. They need to develop a biblical worldview so they can go out and change this world. Would you empower this school? Would you empower this church? Would you empower these parents and grandparents to raise a new generation of unbelievably strong, godly thinkers and leaders? And we'll praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you.